doing this morning? Some of you remember me catching you a few weeks ago, but some of you I think I might have caught in another little white lie. Telling that okay or fine or something similar story. You may have thought I would call everyone on at once and then let it pass, but I think it's time to talk about it. So why do we tell our little social white lies about how we're doing? I know sometimes I think I just don't have time to tell the whole story. You know, Mary Beth, you're going to give me 1 to 2 seconds to answer, and I have 3 things that made me really happy this week, and 1 thing that still has me ticked off since Tuesday, and even just saying that was too long to fit into your time frame. Sometimes what I have to say about how I'm doing is too personal, and I just don't know you well enough, Mary Beth. You just don't get to know that sort of thing about my life yet. Sometimes what I have to say about my life is just too much to share, and I don't think you can handle it. You know, Mary Beth, there are people who want to know the details of raising my particular little darlings this week, and then there are people who would be aghast at my personal parenting style. Either I'm too strict or too lenient, you just can't win. Or sometimes what I have to say is things I'm worried I would get advice about when I don't want it. You know, Mary Beth, sometimes you ask how I am, and when I answer, you want to give me advice on how to make things better. I also get advice like that from my boss, my teacher, my doctor, even my therapist. And you are a great person, but I'm just not ready to hear it from you today. So what does this mean as a congregation? And how does this relate to the title of my sermon, I'm Not Just One Box? Well, it might mean that we don't exactly tell each other the truth, or rather, our truths. Well, we tell each other partial truths, or bits and pieces of who we are, but we don't share all of our important stories. We only know a snippet of each other, and I'd like to encourage us to take time to learn more about one another. So I remember one time my family was asked to light the chalice. We were celebrating something to do with large families, and ours had been coming here for about 5 or 6 years at this point, and that meant that my partners and I had kids in preschool, elementary, middle school, high school, and young adults at that point. In addition, Troy was working the sound in the AV and wearing several other hats. My son had just begun cooking for the Wednesday night dinners, and I was singing in the choir and doing teaching activities. So I stood up here and I introduced each of us by name and shared our last names. After the service, a number of people came up to me and mentioned that although they knew all of us, they had no idea that we were all related to one another. Some people were surprised at how many kids I had, as they had thought I'd only had 1 or 2 because they'd only met me in the context of 1 or 2. It's in this way that I'd like us to consider our interactions with people of this congregation and in the wider world. It can be shocking when we realize that people have connections and attributes that we had not considered. For instance, look around this room right now. According to the CDC, 1 in 4 adults has a disability. Could you name which 25% of our congregation that identifies? Sometimes it might seem easy. If I'm using my electric mobility scooter, it makes it easy to identify that I have a disability. But what if I'm using my cane? Well, or What if I'm not using my cane, but I'm putting my legs up during service like I often do? What if my 20-year-old uses their cane? Would you think they have a disability, or just that they're being dramatic? Or maybe they have just a temporary injury. Who checks the box of disabled in your mind? What about those who are hard of hearing? How do we know if there's anyone who has a hard time hearing in the room? When is it okay to just use our big voice? Or do we need to get out the microphone if everyone is okay with us, or if everyone is okay with us just using our big voice? When do we know if that's okay? How do we know if anyone in the room has a mental illness? Another type of attribute we must consider is the kind of attributes that will be on the 2020 US Census. I think most of you know the kind I mean. Name, age, gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, place of birth, income level, disabilities, heritage you claim, race, racial identity, national citizenship, religions you've rejected, religions or belief systems you embrace, whether you're a Republican or Democrat, etc. Okay, so I might have thrown a few extra in there because they are on the Unitarian Universalist census requirements. Those are the things that we want to know when we meet a new person at church. Don't be shy, you can admit it, you want to know those things. But you have to be careful how you ask those questions, as some of them can be very hard for people to answer. Now, one of the most challenging for people to talk about is race and racial identity. This is true even within UU congregations. We've had many conversations about how we discuss race here at MDUUC, and it is a very tender subject. But it is one of the most important ways in which we consider sorting people in our minds, either consciously or subconsciously. People tend to visit and feel welcome with people who are visibly like them, or who also see people who are visibly different in some way. If we have only a few people who check those boxes, and we keep asking them and wanting to hold them up as examples, our members are consistently attending friends who are people of color, we need to make our visitors of color feel comfortable in other ways. It isn't fair to ask our people of color to keep standing up and saying, you check that box over and over again. Every person has a right to have multiple identities and get to check multiple check boxes. No one should be required to hold that multiple check box alone. But this doesn't mean asking people of color to change. This is where those of us working in allyship need to change. We must find ways to alleviate the burden and create an environment where all feel welcomed. Another category where it's possible for a person to be checking off a box is age. I feel like this isn't as big a thing with some of the ages I won't mention, but really, we do work really hard to get people of all generations involved in our services. However, sometimes we find ourselves asking the same people to represent their generation over and over again, and we don't recognize them as anything else. Once again, these people deserve the chance to be heard as a whole person, not just as the youth representative or the young adult we look to speak for the youth or the young adults. To borrow from another group, when you get to know one UU teen, you know one UU teen. We cannot ask one person to keep speaking or representing their entire peer group over and over. even in less emotionally charged situations, there are things I don't always talk about, things not everyone knows about me. I used to be a professional teacher and worked teaching reading to kids who were emotionally disturbed. I've homeschooled all my kids for at least 1 year of their education. I'm in a non-traditional relationship with Troy and our other partner, Sue, who attends MDUUC occasionally. I've been out for myself and my family as queer and part of the greater LGBTQIAA family. I call my family a rainbow family because we've got one of just about every stripe imaginable. Few people that have met me in the last 5 or 6 years know that I used to sing in the choir and that it was what got me coming to church on a regular basis. I teach our whole lives to our kids here at our congregation, and it's one of my favorite things to do. The only reason that some people know I do it is that I'm missing from services for the better part of 3 months each winter quarter. I'm hoping to be trained in all the levels, including young adult, and older adult levels by the end of the year. I've been in plays here, including the Laramie Project, which was very touching. I was part of the first Beloved Conversations group. I've helped coordinate kids and family events. I've worked with teens, getting teens to General Assembly in Portland and in New Orleans. Attending General Assemblies, regional and district assemblies are some of my favorite things to do as part of being a UU. All of us have our own reasons for being here. I started my search for a church to belong to originally because the Catholic Church just didn't answer my questions and couldn't accept me as the person I am. And pagans just didn't have enough of a set schedule and a set ritual to follow like I needed. I found that I needed a little bit more of both, and I found that here. I'd be happy to tell you more about all of this, but you'll have to sit with me and get to know me a little bit better and let me get to know you better too. I'm not sure I will have time to talk with each of you today. You might have to talk to each other, your neighbors, the newcomers, the person sitting next to you, the person who introduced themselves to you last month and whose name you forgot. Just talk to each other, ask a question, dig deeper, find out a little bit more. Get to know each other in more than one way. After all, imagine how boring it would be if each of us fit into only one box in our Unitarian Universalist census inventory.